So good afternoon, and thank you for tuning in to listening to my little lecture today. This is the first of our two lectures related to climate change and environmental changes. And today is me talking about computer models, and next week will be Ashish, my colleagues, talking about soil microbes. So I'm Greta Bocedi, a research fellow at the University of Aberdeen School of Biological Sciences. And I've been here for quite a while, actually. I came here in 2009 to do a master's degree, and then I was lucky enough to stay here to do my PhD and then a postdoc. And then in 2017, I was awarded a research fellowship from the Royal Society, and that enabled me to start building my own research group and pursue my line of research. And today I want to share with you some of this research, which is about using computer models for predicting and managing species responses to environmental changes. So we're all familiar with the gloomy scenarios of our times, right? With anthropogenic environmental changes such as climate change, habitat fragmentation, and habitat loss that are dramatically impacting on biodiversity and ultimately on our health as well. And as a scientist, but a society more broadly, we are concerned, and we should be concerned about it, and trying to contrast this negative effect on biodiversity. And within the toolbox that scientists can use to do this kind of quite a demanding challenge, there are predictive models. So models are a representation of likely species responses to different and potentially interactive pressures, such as, for example, climate change or habitat fragmentation, but also to alternative potential management intervention that we might want to deploy. Further, predictive models or models in general can help us to better understand the quite complex species ecological and evolutionary dynamics that ultimately are produced by individuals' behavior at the local and the landscape level. And this increased understanding can then feed back and help us producing better models that can have better predictive power and accuracy. Now, in the last 15 or 20 years, there have been quite a few calls for moving beyond statistical model and adopting what have been called in many different ways, but basically a next generation of models that are process-based or mechanistic models. And I'll explain what that means. So this is a summary figure that was published in a review in Journal of Biogeography in 2012, so quite some time ago already. And we see a continuous of model types here. And on the left, we have correlative models, which are the by far most popular and most used so far. And these models are called also SDM, or species distribution models, are basically statistical models that correlate environmental variables directly to species occurrence or abundance. So they rely heavily on the current species distribution. At the other end of the spectrum, we have what here they're called forward models, but basically it's just another way to call process-based model. And this type of model instead is not statistical at all, but they formulate the ecology of a species as mathematical function, thereby defining the causality. So while correlative models describe what we see, describe how, where a species is at the time, how it correlates with the environment, process-based model define why a species is there and why it will respond in a certain way to the ecological change, environmental change. So despite being very popular, correlative models, because they require less data to be parameterized, the parameters have no a priori defined ecological meaning and the processes are implicit. This implies or results in the fact that they have very low predictive power and they cannot be extrapolated to novel or future environments. On the other hand, process-based models are built around explicit mechanisms, and the parameters have a clear ecological interpretation that is defined a priori. There have been quite a few papers, this is a sample of those if you're interested, analyzing the advantages and the challenges of process-based models. Just very quickly to highlight the advantages is, as I said before, in our ecological and evolutionary understanding. They are based on correlations, they don't describe patterns, but on processes. They can get at the causal link of how species will respond to a given change. And because of that, they potentially have higher predictive power and they can be extrapolated to novel environments. And finally, they can also use as an instrument to generate new hypotheses that we are currently not thinking about. Now, what are these processes I'm keeping talking about? So these are the underpinning biological processes that determine species behavior and dynamics. So this is a very high-level summary figure that we publish in a review that we published on Science already in 2016, and this is the link if you want to have a look at it. The review was, a perspective was exactly aimed at the use of process-based models and at the problem of data availability. And these figures summarize which are these processes I'm talking about. So do we have species physiology, species demography, so how do they reproduce, how do they survive, species dispersal, so how individuals move across the landscape from one place to the other, species interaction, so how different species interact together and will affect each other, and evolution, so will a species respond with evolutionary changes to environmental changes. So you can imagine process-based models are sort of a virtual reality or simulation where we represent individual and we represent these processes. Individuals have a certain physiology, they move around the landscape, they reproduce, they survive or they die, etc. When I was doing my PhD here in Aberdeen, one of the main objectives of my PhD was to develop one of such process-based model. And this resulted in a modeling platform called Rainshifter. This is the initial paper that described it in 2014. And now we also have a nice new website giving in more detail about this platform. Also, there is a preprint that describes the second version of this model that is come out this year. And for those of you that are into the R platform, the Rainshifter now can also be used from R. So Rainshifter, as I said, is one of these models that create this virtual reality and this simulation where we can input layers, information from our system, which could be landscape and habitat suitability for the species of interest, could be the current species distribution, can be the environmental variation. And then on this layer, our individuals, as I said, reproduce, die, disperse. We also have a representation of their underlying genetics. And finally, after the simulation is done, the model will give you outputs that can be various, can tell you something about species distribution or persistence, their ecological and evolutionary responses to changes, but also the effectiveness of management intervention that you tested in silico. So as I said, models like Rainshifter can be used to investigate species ecological and evolutionary responses to environmental changes. They can also use to develop new theory to increase our understanding, as I was saying at the beginning. And use that has been done mostly so far is a tool for exploring the relative effectiveness of alternative management intervention. And since its publication, Rainshifter has been used for quite a few case studies. Here there are an example here. So we have some invasive species like the American mink and the round goby. They have species that are currently expanding the range as they have Asian crested ibis, but also species that are of conservation concern like the leopard, the orangutan, and the lynx. Today I want to give you two of these examples very briefly for time, because the time is limited, that really focus on how we can use this tool to explore different management intervention. So the first example I show is the latest paper that's been published and regards the Persian leopards. This is the paper, and it's just been published this year in Ecological Application. It is open access. This is the link, and so you can access it for free and read it if you'd like. This was the work of a PhD student, Benjamin Blale, at the University of the Humboldt University of Berlin, and he contacted us to collaborate and apply the model to this species. And the point was, how can we, what conservation strategies are most effective to ensure that the Persian leopard survives and expands its population? So this is the study area. Here we are in the Caucasus, so quite a large area. You can see here in perspective that comprise different nations. And these are some snapshots of the leopard from camera trap that WWF Caucasus deployed in the area. And although it's a very big area and it used to be populated by a good population of leopards, now the leopards are confined in this southern area in Iran. And as many large carnivores in the world, the Persian leopard is threatened of extinction, and two of the main threats are persecution by humans and prey depletion. So these are two of the natural prey of the leopard, which are wild goats and sheep. But also prey depletion means that leopards are more and more attracted to livestock, and this increases human-wildlife conflict and leads to even more persecution. The question that Benjamin had was, what is the potential spatial structure and size of a future Persian leopard population in the Caucasus? And how do persecution reduction and prey restoration different scenarios affect the population variability? First, he did a habitat suitability model to see how much habitat is available for the leopard in the Caucasus. This was validated with camera traps, as I show you some example, but also scrape and scouts from different surveys. And this resulted in this map. So here we have the green map shows the habitat suitability for the leopard from very low in yellow to very high in dark green. So there is quite a lot of suitable habitat in the Caucasus for the leopard, but as I told you before, currently only this dark shaded area are inhabited by the leopard. So huge potential for recolonization. And secondly, Benjamin took all the information that are available from the leopard, his habitat suitability map, and put them into the model, into Rainshifter, to try and test different scenarios of prey restoration and different scenarios of persecution reduction. And these are the results. This is quite a big figure, but I'm going to explain it. So here in the different columns, we see different scenarios of prey restoration. So from very low, not much prey restoration, to high. While different rows represent different levels of persecution reduction from, again, very low, not much is done, to high. And first message, and the colors reflect the occupancy probability after 100 years. So it's telling us what's the probability that leopards are present in a particular location after 100 years from now. And it goes from more than 99% in blue to less than 1%, so no presence at all in gray. And the first message we see is that no matter the prey restoration strategy, if the persecution reduction is slow, not only the leopard are not able to expand in the Caucasus, but they're likely going extinct from where they're present right now. So persecution came up as the main risk factor for the predators, for the leopard. Then we see though that even if we have high persecution reduction, but no prey restoration or very low, then the leopard can perhaps survive where they are already now, but they can't expand further in the Caucasus. It's only when we combine high persecution reduction and medium to high prey restoration that we have almost 100% survival in the current area and also a good probability of the Caucasus being recolonized. So in a nutshell, this study showed that the Caucasus has the potential to host a viable leopard population if the proper conservation measures are implemented. The high mortality, so the persecution is the main constraint to the population growth. So strategy like strict law enforcement against poaching, but also carnivore adapted livestock husbandry should be implemented. But again, this is not enough. This needs to go along with prey restoration. And actually enforcing stricter laws against poaching can also help restoring the prey, because poachers also affect the natural prey of the leopard. And prey restoration, as I said before, can help reducing the human-wildlife conflict and so have a positive feedback on poaching reduction. So this was the first example where we have a species that is at risk and you might want to implement conservation strategy to help it recover and help it expand. But sometimes the species is not there anymore where you would like to, and that's the case of the Eurasian lynx in the UK or Scotland in this case. And so you might want to think about strategy for reintroducing the species, and models can help you with that as well. So this is a nice study that was done by Tom Ovenden. Here is Tom, when he was doing his master's degree actually in Bangor University. Now he's doing a PhD in Stirling. Again, here is the link. And he wanted to use the Rainshifter model to ask how different reintroduction strategy would perform to reintroduce lynx in Scotland. So, as I said, how does reintroduction for 3 alternative proposed reintroduction sites compare? And what is the probability of long-term population persistence? So here is a map of Scotland, as you might recognize, and all these color patches are suitable habitats for the lynx. And these 3 red ones are sites that have been actually proposed as possible reintroduction sites for the lynx. So we have Kildare Forest, we have Aberdeenshire, and we have the Kintyre Peninsula. So what Tom did was initializing our model from each time from a different site with some individuals, some lynx individuals, and run the model and see what was the best strategy in terms of where to reintroduce the lynx, how many individuals, and so on. This is the results in a nutshell, really. This is the probability of population extinction, so from very low to very high, and over 100 years, from reintroduction over 100 years. And we see a clear ranking of the reintroduction sites. So Kildare Forest is performing very badly, so there is over 80% chance that the population won't survive. A bit better Aberdeenshire, but a lot better is if the lynx were to be reintroduced into the Kintyre Peninsula. And we can see that spatially here. So these 3 maps again depict the occupancy probability after 100 years. So what's the probability that lynx would be there after 100 years? and it's going basically from 0 in blue to from 90 to 100% in yellow. And we see that if the lynx were to be introduced and kill the forest, then the highlands would never be colonized in 100 years, and there is kind of low probability that the lynx will survive anyway in southern Scotland. A bit better in Aberdeenshire for colonization of the highlands, but no colonization of the southern part. While when the lynx is reintroduced in Kintyre Peninsula, we see a good probability that the population will colonize the islands and survive. Still, there is no colonization of the southern part, and this is clearly due to the complete lack of suitable habitat in the central belt. So probably my 20 minutes are up, so I want just to put up these slides again, and I hope with this very brief presentation, I give you an example of how process-based computer model can, well, help designing conservation strategy. Those are the examples that I've given you, but there also as example as it can be used to investigate what will be the responses to environmental changes or the likely responses, and also to develop new theory. And with this, I thank you for listening, and I'm happy to take any question now, or if you want to email me in a second moment, please feel free to do that. And I'm going to unshare my presentation. Okay. And okay, we also have already some questions. You mentioned evolution as one of the processes. How commonly is evolution included in these models, and how is it done? Right, evolution is being recognized only quite recently that can be important for species responses to environmental changes. As classically, it was thought to happen at a much longer time scales. So it wasn't thought to be really important for kind of short time scale responses. Now there is a recognition that actually evolution can happen fast and can be fundamental for species responses to environmental changes, but is still very, very rarely incorporated in this model. Partly because we need to collect more data and we need more information on that. But how is it done? Let's say we can already do it in the model should we have the data. So either kind of phenotypically by model the changes of phenotype, let's say, for example, reproductive ability or body size or movement ability in time, or by modeling the explicit genetics that underline these traits in the models, so we can actually have representation of genomes and of genes and mutation and selection, so that we produce evolution. So it's quite exciting, actually, new field of research, I think. There is another question. Are these methods widely applicable to multiple species? One of the main criticisms of this process-based model has been that they are really data hungry, and so they really require a lot of data on specific species to be useful. This is in part true, and so at this level of details that I show you, for example, for the leopard or for the lynx, perhaps they won't never be able to, to be applied for hundreds and hundreds of species at the time. But it's also true that they can be applied at a higher level, and a lot of information are becoming available with new technology now. For example, on individual movements with tracking devices, or on genetics with new sequencing technology. So I think it's coming. They will become more and more ready applicable to more and more species, but it's again an active area of research. There's another one. Okay. Someone asked, how is climate change accounted for in this model? Can you please explain? Yes, so of course there was no climate change in the example I given you, but again, these models are very useful for scenarios testing. So I show you briefly for the leopard that there was a habitat suitability map. Okay, that map was static, it wasn't changing through time. And when we incorporate climate change, the habitat suitability map will change through time as we run the model based on different scenarios. Of course, these are scenarios, right? But based on different scenarios that are available now for climate changes, which can include predicted changes in temperature, precipitation, and so on and so forth. It can also predict increase short-term variation, increase occurrence of extreme event. And so if you imagine this virtual reality, then the species will have to act and survive in an environment that is affected by these different scenarios of climate change. And the same is true for land use change. Now we have prediction and scenarios of land use, how land use will change in different parts of the world. And we can incorporate that as well in the models. Let me see if there are any questions. Have the results of this model be ever proven? I'm not sure what is meant by being proven. I mean, the models can be validated, meaning that they can reproduce. They can be validated if they reproduce current patterns. For example, if we have data on time series, we can see if the model can reproduce our species numbers, population numbers have changed through time, or the distribution has changed to time up to now. When we go into forecast, then it's difficult, right? It can't be proven unless, if you do a prediction now, maybe in 20 years, you will be able to prove it. So in that way, they haven't in that forecast way, but they have been shown to be able, not always, but to be able to reproduce kind of past dynamics. Let me see. There's another question. Would the conservation practices already in place, for example, between African country, Kenyan, European, East, UK, affect how model can be used? I think they won't affect how model can be used, but will definitely need to be taken into account. For example, these models that I've shown you are purely ecological, so they're purely focused on the species and on the ecology side of it. But one very interesting area of research is coupling these models with more kind of socio-ecological models, so models that we also models what humans do and what, what, for example, how practitioner will change their behavioral conservation practices according to the responses of the species of interest. That's the more sophisticated way, but also the kind of the easier way would be any way to account for the spatial variation in these conservation strategies. For example, difference between protected areas and non-protected areas, or predicted woodland restoration, for example, or things like that. Those can be implemented in the model and should be implemented in the model if the model really to be used to make conservation decision. Sorry, I lost my mouse. I cannot see any other question at the moment. We'll give it a couple of minutes if anybody has any more question. No. Okay. Oh, maybe one. Yes. Okay. Yeah. Thank you, everybody. Yeah. As Susan said in the chat, thank you, everybody, for joining us. And there is my email on the lecture. So if you can think about any question or any information you'd like, just feel free to email me at any time. And thank you very much for listening.